such a joy to be here in this beautiful Lake Como with the amazing views, the amazing food, those amazing spaces. And so it is just such a treat. Thank you to Karen for bringing us all together to share in this experience. So as mentioned, I study how we spend time and how does that influence our happiness. And it's sort of funny that I'm sort of become somewhat of an expert in this time and happiness space, because my relationship with time started off as not very happy at all. In fact, it was unhappy. And in fact, I felt that for my own happiness, time was my biggest barrier. I'll share a story that I share to open my book that I suspect some of you guys can relate to. And it was earlier in my career when I was an assistant professor at Wharton, living in Philly, and I had traveled up to New York that day to give a talk, and my talk was sandwiched between back-to-back meetings, and then I was rushing from that to this dinner, and then rushing to the train station, and I'm in a cab, and we all know how fast New York City cab drivers drive, and I am not someone who yells, but here I was yelling at this man who was already speeding to hurry up, to go faster. I could not miss the last train that would get me home to my 4-month-old and my husband asleep in Philly. And I made the train that night, but I remember so vividly sort of slunk into my seat, looking out the window as the night lights were whizzing by in a blur. And I was like, I don't know if I can keep up, right? Between the pressures of work, wanting to be a good parent, wanting to be a good partner, wanting to be a good friend, the never-ending pile of chores, there simply wasn't enough time to get it all done, let alone to do any of it well, let alone to enjoy any of it along the way. And I wanted more time, but not just more time so that I could get more done. I wanted more time so that I could slow down and actually experience the days that I was living. I wanted more time so that my life didn't continue to sort of pass by in this blur. And I know now that what I was experiencing is what we refer to in the literature as time poverty. It's that acute feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it. Show of hands, how many of you guys feel that there seems to never be enough time to get everything done? Yeah, a lot of you. And it's not just us. I conducted a national poll in the US that showed that nearly half of Americans feel this way. And though moms tend to feel more time poor than dads, and working parents, particularly when your partner works, feel especially time poor, all types of people in our data showed that they lacked for time, including those who don't work for pay, including those who don't have kids. And it's not just my fellow Americans. Folks around the globe report suffering from a hectic pace of life with too little time. And this is a serious problem because not only is it prevalent, the effects are really detrimental. So research shows that when we feel time poor, it makes us less healthy. So we're less likely to exercise, we delay going to the doctor, we eat fast food that's not necessarily healthy, but it is fast. It makes us less nice. So when we're in a hurry, we're less likely to slow down and help others out. It makes us less confident in being able to achieve our goals, and it makes us less happy. And in my unhappy state on the train that night, I was like, the solution is obvious. I need to quit my job and move to a sunny island where I could spend all the hours of my days sort of relaxing and spending my hours exactly how I wanted, thinking that if only I had a whole lot more time, then I would be happier. But is that true, right? Before I walked into my chairman's office, sort of like, I'm quitting my dream job, and before I had my husband sort of join me in packing up the house to move to the beach, I was like, I wonder, are people who have a whole lot more time, are they in fact happier? And it's an empirical question, and one that I've gone on to test with colleagues Hal Hirschfield and Mercer Shreve. We looked at what is the relationship between the amount of discretionary time people have and their happiness. And across studies, In one of the studies, we analyzed data from the American Time Use Survey that looks at, for tens of thousands of working as well as non-working Americans, how they spent a regular day. And from that, we could calculate how much time they spent on discretionary activities and relate that to their reported life satisfaction, their happiness. And what we found across our studies was a consistent pattern of results, which looked like this. It's an upside-down U shape, which is pretty interesting because it shows that happiness goes down on both sides of the spectrum. Yes, there is such thing as having too little time, right? Me on the train that night. And in this data set, we found that those with less than approximately 2 hours of discretionary time in the day were less happy. And this is because of those heightened feelings of stress. But I think the interesting part, and perhaps more surprising part, was this other side, where we found that there is such thing as having too much time. That in this data set, those with more than approximately 5 hours of discretionary time in the day were also less happy. We're like, why, right? Like in that daydream of moving to the beach, how is it that having all the time you had available to spend exactly how you want, how could that be associated with less happiness? So digging into the data more, conducting additional studies, what it turns out is that we are driven to be somewhat productive, right? We are averse to being idle. And so when we spend all of the hours of our days, day in and day out, this isn't vacation, this isn't even sabbatical, this is in your typical day-to-day life, spending time with nothing to show for it, it undermines our sense of purpose. And from that, we feel less satisfied. And this is important because it gets to the heart of what I was sort of struggling with and grappling with that night, that absolutely there are ways of spending time that don't involve paid work that provide a sense of purpose. Volunteer work, engaging in a hobby that's personally developing and helps you grow. But I realized for me and for a lot of people, work is actually a great source of purpose. And so the answer in those hectic days isn't to quit everything, because having a whole lot more time wouldn't necessarily make you happier. But what's also interesting in this pattern of results is you see that there's a pretty wide range in the middle there in the yellow, where it's flat. That is, there's no relationship between the amount of time folks have and their happiness. And this, I think, highlights something really important. And it is that for our happiness, it's actually not so much about how much time you have available. It's really how you invest the time that you have available. It's not about being time rich. It's about making the time you have rich. And then the question is, well, how do we make the time we have rich? And that question is what sort of redirected and has driven my research agenda since then to try to figure out how do we invest the hours of our days so that we feel more satisfied, so that at the end of the week, you're looking back and instead of that depleted stress state, even if busy, you feel fulfilled, so that we experience joy along the way, and so that at the end of our years, we can look back without regret. And based off of my research in this area, as well as that of my colleagues, I pulled together and developed a course that I've been teaching to MBAs and executive MBAs at UCLA, and I then brought that together into happier hours so that more people could benefit from these empirically based insights. And I share in the book exercises and strategies so that readers, the same assignments I give my students, readers can apply so you can immediately experience the benefits of these research-based insights. Now, I'll share a couple of those exercises with you today, but before I do, I want to share an analogy that I continue to find helpful in my own time-spending decisions, and it's one that's really nicely shown in a short film that I share in the very first day of my class. And in the film, a professor walks into his classroom, and on the desk in front of the classroom, he puts a large clear jar. And then into the jar, he pours golf balls, and the golf balls reach the very top, and he asks the students, is the jar full? Students nod their head, because yes, the jar looks full, but nope. Then he pours pebbles into the jar, and the pebbles fill those spaces between the golf balls up to the top. He asks the students again, is the jar full? Students nod their head, nope. Then he pours sand into the jar, and the sand fills all the spaces between the golf balls, between the pebbles up to the top. Is the jar full? And by this point, the students are like laughing. They're like, yes, the jar is full. But there's one more step. He pulls out 2 bottles of beer. He opens one, pours it into the jar. He opens the other, and he goes and sort of perches himself on the front of the desk and takes a sip. And he explains, this jar represents the time of your life. Those golf balls are those things that really matter to you. Your relationships with your family, your friendships, the work you do that's so aligned with your purpose. The pebbles are the other important things in your life, like your job, your house. The sand is everything else. The sand is all of that stuff that fills your time without you even thinking about it. And what's really important to know is had he put the sand into the jar first, all of the golf balls would not have fit. That is, if we let our time get filled, it absolutely will get filled, but not necessarily with the stuff that matters. So it's so important to identify for yourself what are your golf balls and put them into your time jar first. Put them into your schedule first to protect time for them so that absolutely the rest of your time will get filled, but at least this way, at the end of the week, you look back and you're like, even though your schedule is full, you feel fulfilled because you've invested in what matters to you. So then the question is like, well, what are your golf balls? That's an important step, right? To identify what is it that matters for you? What are those activities that are worth your time? And I share several exercises to help individuals identify for themselves what are their golf balls. In the research, one way to get at this is through time tracking. So over the course of people's days, see what they're doing as well as how they're feeling, so you can pull out, on average, what are those activities that tend to be associated with the most positive emotion? What are those activities that tend to be associated with the most negative emotion? What you see is, on average, the activities that make us sort of most satisfied and happiest are those that are socially connecting, either sort of physically or spending time with family and friends. Our least happy activities are commuting, work, and housework. But this is based off of averages, right? The average person, as well as the average instantiation of any one of these activities. So, like, there are some absolutely people in the data for whom their work hours are very happy. And I'm sure you can relate to, like, not every time you're socializing is all that fun, right? So what I encourage folks to do is to track their own time. Over the course of a week, writing down for each half hour, what are you doing? And being more specific than just work or socializing, what work activity are you doing? If you're socializing, whom are you with and what are you doing? And, as importantly, rating. Coming out of that time, how do you feel on a 10-point scale? How satisfying and happy and fulfilling do you feel? Fulfilled do you feel? And this is really helpful because, while admittedly the process itself is a little bit tedious over the week, but it's so worthwhile because at the end of the week, you have this fantastic personalized data set that you can look for yourself. What are those activities that for you are the most satisfying? What are those worthwhile ways of spending? You can also see just how much time you're spending on your various activities so you can pick out what your sand is. You can be like, holy cow, I had no idea I was spending that much time on X. And it doesn't even make me that happy, which you know from your ratings. And in many cases, not even that necessary. So that is a very easy way to sort of take that sandy time, reclaim those hours, and allocate them towards those activities that, based off of your ratings, you know are more satisfying. Another exercise that you can do is simply reflect. And you can do this right now. Think back over your last few weeks. What were those times that you felt the most joy, right? And even that reflection can be quite revealing and illuminating. For me, in doing this, I looked back and I was like, my weekly coffee date with my daughter, Lida. This is an interesting one because it was born out of a very functional routine. It was on Thursday mornings, on the way of dropping her at her preschool, me into my office, I wanted caffeine, right? So we stopped at the local coffee shop, and what was a routine, it turned into this really sort of treasured ritual where we now have our coffee date playlist that we play in the car. I get my cappuccino, she gets her hot chocolate, we have our croissants, and this is 30 minutes each week where it's just about the two of us being together. And research shows that couples who have shared rituals report greater relationship satisfaction. Families who have shared holiday traditions are more likely to gather for the holidays and enjoy the holidays more. So as a simple strategy, and it's a simple reframing, think about, are there activities in your sort of routine and daily life that you can give a name, turn it into a ritual to make that time more special and meaningful? Now, these joyful activities are really important for our happiness. But so often, because of time poverty, we don't feel like we have the time, so we don't make the time. Or even when we're doing them, we're rushing through them. Or we're distracted because we're either on our phones or in our heads thinking about what's next in managing our to-do lists. But it's understandable that we don't sort of pay much attention to these activities because we are subject to hedonic adaptation. So this is our psychological propensity to get used to things over time. And often these joyful moments are these very ordinary experiences. So hedonic adaptation is like if you do the same thing over and over again, if you're with the same person over and over again, they stop having as intense of an emotional impact on you, right? You adapt. And it's good that we adapt in the face of negative circumstances. It makes us resilient. But it's bad when we get so used to the good things in life that we stop noticing. I mean, think back, the excitement of those initial sort of months when you were on that new job, or the happiness of coming home to your new house. Or think back to the very first time your partner said, "I love you." It's like fireworks, right? And then in just a few years, "I love you" gets shortened to "love you" as you're hanging up the phone or walking out the door. And if something as profound as the declaration of love, from the love of your life, turns into words that you barely even notice, that shows how important it is to be aware of hedonic adaptation and to figure out how can we offset it so that we do continue to feel the joy that's right there in the time that we're already spending. One way to do this, and I share several strategies to help offset hedonic adaptation, one is simply counting your times left. Because these everyday experiences, we assume they will continue to happen every day, but that's not true, right? Time passes, our time is limited, and also circumstances of our life change. And so by recognizing that our time is limited, and my research shows that when we realize our time is limited, it makes us savor more. It makes us pay attention and soak up and get the joy from even those ordinary experiences. So in this exercise, first, identify an activity that brings you joy. So use my coffee date with my daughter as an example. And then you count, how many times have you done this in your life thus far? Because this is an everyday experience, it's often a lot. So I calculated, Lita and I have gone on about 400 coffee dates together. Then the next step is to calculate how many times will you likely do this in the future, accounting, again, for the fact that circumstances in your life will likely change. If your joyful activity involves someone else, which often it does, circumstances in their life will likely change, and life is finite, right? So I calculated that Lita is now 7. When she turns 12, I suspect she's going to probably want to go to the coffee shop with her friends instead of me. And so it'll be a negotiation, so it won't be every week. And then she's going to go off to college. And then she's going to move to New York, and if she's anything like I was. And so I calculated that we have about 230 coffee dates together left. And then the last step is what percentage of your total times do you have left? And very often, it is much less than you initially think. I realized that Lita and I have about 36% of our coffee dates left. That's way less than half, and she's only 7 years old. Now, what's the impact of that? After, wiping a tear away, it is a really positive impact because what it does is it makes me make the time, right? This half hour is so joyful, it's so critical to my overall happiness, and it makes me protect the time. So this is a golf ball I put into my schedule first. On the Thursday mornings, I wouldn't take meetings before 9, now that she's in elementary school and We've shifted it to weekend mornings. We don't start the activities until after, so we protect the time. But as importantly, it affects how I engage in that time. Knowing how precious it is, my phone is away, no distraction there. I quiet that to-do list that's running through my head always, because this is the time that matters. And this half hour isn't just the half hour. These minutes color my happiness over the rest of the week. It actually, if you ask me how satisfied am I in my life, it influences that because of the connection that comes from these very deliberate and intentional sort of ways of engaging in time. And so this brings me back to a point that I think is so important that I hope you guys take away, again, that I made before. When it comes to happiness and time, it is not about quantity of time, how much you have available, or even how much you spend on any given activity to determine its influence on your satisfaction. It is really about making the time that you spend rich, investing in those things that matter, and being invested when you're spending that time. And so with that, I thank you all for your time.